observations about the text that we've been making in the class. So we've talked about in the text, so words, phrases. Are there any text critical issues in here? There is an intertext in here. What about historical or social background? What do we make of this? So as we do this, I could read through this whole thing, but what I would do is I would kind of have my Bible software open on one side of one side of my computer screen, and I would also have another document that's open, and I've put that into this Matthew 2 interpretive notes paper. And this is a PDF, but what I would do is I would make some comments. I would begin to make some observations about my context. What does this passage have a reputation? And yeah, the Magi passage has, Christmas time, the wise men, we three kings, manger scenes, Christmas plays. And I would have to ask the question, how much does this affect the way I see the passage? Are there things that I have a harder time seeing because of the Christmas context of this passage? I would then make some comments about where this fits in the Gospel of Matthew. But then what I would basically do is I would start. Now, for me, I'm a Greek student. I know my Greek, and many of you have had Greek. Some of you have not. Either way, what I would do is I would go verse by verse. If you have had Greek, I would encourage you to give yourself a translation, your own translation of the verse. If not, maybe you want to list 3 or 4 different translations that you can read from and see right there. And then I would start to make observations. Now, in this first passage, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. And I would make observations about, so what are my observations? What are my hunches? What are the things that show up in this passage? And I think Herod the king is a very interesting idea that shows up in this passage. And especially with the idea that Jesus is claimed to be Messiah or king. And it would be helpful to understand who Herod was and what he was like. And what is Matthew doing with evoking his presence in the birth account? I would also note that, this idea, what is going on in this passage ultimately in the overall understanding of Matthew. I would also notice that Magi from the east. What are they? What are Magi? What is a magus? And where else do we find them? So if I were to run a word search on Magi, I might find that there's another Magi that's mentioned in Acts 13:6, which is this false prophet Elymas, who is called a magus. I would also note that Daniel, in Daniel 2, that Daniel is noted as the leader of the Magoi or the Magi. So those are all some things that I would do. I would do word searches. I would look at what's in the passage. I would have my hunches. I would continue to do that verse by verse through the entirety of this. Now I'm going to post this interpretive notes on the Moodle site so you can see what I see in this passage. And do you see what I see? Of course, a star. Sorry, no jokes. Okay. So I would also note where translations change, so this phrase, the star in the east, the NRSV translates it as the star at its appearance. What does that mean? So I would basically this is a place where I would catalog my observations. Okay, it's something of an intermediate step between beginning the project and writing the paper. This is not the paper itself. This is a formal way to put all of my observations into one document so that then I could go through and I could see what is going to make my paper and what's going to end up on the cutting room floor. Okay. So, instead of these raw observations, what I'm looking for is digested observations, and that leads me to what a close reading text analysis paper might look like. Now, this example I will also post on Moodle, and I will note that this is an example of a text analysis paper, but this paper does not include interaction with commentaries, which is something that's required of a text analysis paper. So this is just digested observations, research agenda, that leads me into, that's kind of before my interaction with commentaries. So I've also included in this, at the end of each paragraph, some kind of a denotation of the sort of observation I'm making here. So, in your text analysis paper, it might be good to begin to introduce your passage with your experience with the passage, my context section. So, I say that the visit of the Magi is an event that has become entrenched in nativity tradition or epiphany, and influenced by various apocryphal accounts, art, songs, etc. These are good, but in order to understand the passage, I might have to detangle the biblical text from these various extra-biblical traditions. Notice how I'm trying to say as much as I can, as concisely as I possibly can. I introduce the passage. I then go into a paragraph that will then place the passage in the context of the Gospel of Matthew as a whole. It's part of a birth narrative. That would be something about genre and form. It also seems to be part of a larger introductory section that will conclude with the Sermon on the Mount. All right. Now getting to, you are going to choose, you'll do a little bit of my context, you'll do a little bit of the co-text, and then I want you to choose 3 or 4 issues that are the most significant issues of getting at what the passage is about. So I'm going to choose, I think that it's really one issue, and that is the issue of Herod and the idea of king. So I have a paragraph here about Herod and some of my preliminary thoughts about Herod and what I would need to pursue about Herod, what are my hunches about that, and also a little bit about the messianic or kingly theme in Matthew. I would probably do a little bit more work here in Matthew just to identify what are some other significant passages about king. But it is interesting that they originally are the ones, the Magi are the ones who asked where is he was born king of the Jews, and then the gospel ends with Jesus on a Roman cross with the epitaph above him, this is Jesus, king of the Jews. So this idea of king of the Jews is something that seems a thematic literary issue in the Gospel of Matthew. This plays a role in it, but it's not going to be fully understood until we get to the end. So I would spend a couple paragraphs talking about that particular issue. I also think that if I were to choose another issue, is this issue of the Magi, and I'm going to spend, in this case, I basically talk about, I spend about, let's see, I think I spend maybe, I think I spend 3 or 4 paragraphs talking about Magi and where they come from and some of that. Who are they? Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? If you're a Jew and you're reading this, and are you thinking, are the Magi good? Are they bad? What do I think about them? So I include also down here some comments on the Magi. I would also probably include something about this idea of the star in the east. What is the star? So I've got something about Herod, I've got something about the Magi, and I've got something about the star. I would probably also include with the idea of the star, the idea of the overarching theme of divine announcement. So you've got stars and dreams. So maybe I would bring those things together and make comments on that. I think ultimately, if I were to choose 3 major issues, the issue of Herod and king and the juxtaposition between the 2 kings, Herod and Jesus, and what is Matthew doing with that. I would also then talk about the Magi as ultimately in the issue of Jewish-Gentile relationships. How do the Jewish leaders react to the coming of Jesus, and how do the Magi, Gentiles, react to the coming of Jesus? And I want to talk about the idea of the overarching theme of divine announcement in terms of star, prophets, dreams, and how the intertext might work in there, of the Malachi intertext, how might that work in there? I would end with a paragraph that talks about, well, what is this doing in the text? And basically, ultimately, Matthew seems to include this account to provide some notion of the significance of Jesus' birth. Jesus will draw varied responses from joy to trouble. Some will come to bow down before him, while others will plot his demise. For Matthew, there's an enduring theme of openness to the Gentiles to the person of the Jewish Messiah, while the established Jewish leaders will reject such a claimant. In this way, the visit of the Magi, who are Gentiles of questionable origin, introduce this theme. Now, I would write all of this before I ever consult a commentary. Then I would go to commentaries and I would look at 2, 3 good exegetical commentaries, and I would test my observations against their observations. Do they confirm my observations? Do they move in a different direction? I might then put in some footnotes into this paper that would include what commentaries might say about the things that I thought were important. But as you can see, what I've done is I've taken my ideas, my hunches, I put them into paper in paragraph form. Now I'm going to look to commentaries, and I'm going to see what they say about this particular passage. But this is a general approach, kind of a step-by-step general approach to what I'm looking for in your text analysis paper. I hope this has been helpful. I will post all of these PDFs on Moodle so you can take a look at them. But ultimately, I want your nose in the text. I want you interpreting. I want you making observations. I want you listing what your hunches are. I want you putting out your research agenda. What do I need to know about this passage to make sense of this passage and why the author has written this passage into their writing? So good luck and blessings on you as you do this. I pray that it is a fruitful experience and that you see that the fruit of it in your own personal ministry and in your own life as a scholar and pastor.